So you will hear claims today that need to be fact-checked in advance. One, you will hear that this has no impact on America's small business, but that's not true. Raising the individual rate raises the rate on small businesses, most of whom file as individually. Cutting the pass-through small business tax deduction that impacts 30 million small businesses hurts those pass-through businesses as well. Increasing and expanding the investment tax across America to all small businesses means they have less money to invest in their company, in their workers, and in their growth. And of course, taking the onerous death tax back to what it was before the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act means that more family-owned farms and businesses will now be forced to sell off their land or sell off their property to Uncle Sam, pay their tax to Uncle Sam rather than pass it on to the next generation. How is it fair that Americans work their entire life to build up a nest egg, only to have Uncle Sam swoop in and take nearly half of it over the eligible amount? You'll hear today that President Biden doesn't break his pledge on taxing Americans making less than $400,000. But that's false as well. As you know, businesses don't pay taxes, they collect them. And those burdens land on their workers, lands on their customers, it lands on the retirees whose retirement depends upon their success, and it lands on the communities that they live in. We saw all of this prior to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, where it seemed like every week Americans would wake up to read about another U.S. company moving their manufacturing, jobs, research, and headquarters overseas, leaving so many communities devastated. Well, two different groups, the liberal, I should say left-leaning Tax Policy Center, as well as the Joint Committee on Taxation, confirm that it is lower and middle income families that bear a significant portion of the corporate tax rate. Their taxes will be felt. And in this bill, a significant amount of revenues raised from tobacco and other taxes, where 90% of that tax falls on Americans making less than $400,000. The Biden tax pledge is simply broken in this bill. And speaking of the president, we ought to probably fact-check some of his repeated claims. For example, the one he makes almost every day, that where he claims the $2 trillion Republican tax cuts went to corporations and to the wealthy 1%. A fact check by the Washington Post gives that claim 4 Pinocchios, saying it is misleading and, quote, simply wrong. Not that you won't hear that multiple times today, but it simply isn't the fact. They said the same of Senator Kamala Harris, saying that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, claiming it was a middle-class tax hike. Factcheck.org said the senator must have had a mistweet. It was so far wrong. When failed gubernatorial candidate Stacey Abrams stated the Republican tax bill rigged the system against working people, again, factcheck.org called it distorting the facts. In fact, the highest percentage of tax reduction went to those lower and middle income families. And those who benefited the most were people of color, those with low skills, minorities, women, disabled. We lifted millions of Americans out of poverty. We also, factcheck.org also gave South Bend Mayor Pete Buttigieg another fact check for suggesting the TCJA is responsible for creating the nation's debt problem, and noting that America had 2 of the largest revenue years in American history following the tax cuts. In fact, it was spending largely responsible for the debt. And of course, Senator Bernie Sanders was fact-checked strongly when he said 83% of the benefits went to the top 1%. Factcheck.org simply called it misleading. But that's not the only areas that need fact-checking. If you raise America's corporate tax rate to the highest in the world, jobs will leave America in a big way. And when Secretary Yellen negotiates a global tax agreement that takes our jobs, that takes our tax base, and favors foreign companies and workers over American ones, I guarantee you that is a trade tax agreement Congress will reject. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.